Hey friends, this is Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous, where we analyze pop culture through the lens of race or gender, and sometimes both. I'm your host, Julia Washington, and on today's show, we are going back to a simpler time, depending on who you talk to. But the 90s wedding season is calling, and we are coming for it. The 1990s were a time when wedding rom-coms, say that 5 times fast, seemed to dominate the box office and make people everywhere wonder what their perfect wedding day would look like, who their perfect partner may be, and all the things that just really set us up for literal failure. We're going to discuss 3 wedding films this episode, but before we do, let me introduce you to my guest. Bridget Baker is a brand and website designer. She specializes in working with coaches, consultants, therapists, organizers, and overall people who help people. Her secret power is giving you the permission you need to brand your biz the way you want to. She's been a minimalist since before it was trendy and organized her friends' closets for fun as a kid. She is also my friend in real life. I can say that despite the fact that we've only seen each other for the last year through the digital spaces, but we have met in real life.
Yep.
Welcome to the show, Bridget.
Glad to be here.
I was just thinking about that too. I mean, this isn't going to air like next week, but I was thinking about that. I was like, gosh, I think it's been a year since we've had coffee in person.
That feels like yesterday. How is that
I
possible?
know. It's crazy. Time flies when the world is a
Time
damn
flies when
steam.
you're watching rom-coms.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. I love
That needs to be a
rom-com.
t-shirt.
I know. I'm gonna write that down. I'll give you credit. We'll split the profits.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
The part of the idea for this, because I'm a little older than you. I'm Gen X, the forgotten generation or whatever
Yeah.
we are, and I'm 51 now. So like for me, 90s rom-coms was literally like what
Peak.
I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was the peak of rom-coms. It was the peak of what I thought life was supposed to be like. It was very interesting to unpack these 3 movies at once. So I'm
Oh,
excited to see.
I can't wait. I can't
Mhm.
wait. As I mentioned in the intro, we are revisiting 3 movies from the 1990s that all deal with weddings. 4 Weddings and a Funeral, My Best Friend's Wedding, and Wedding Singer. We are going to discuss these kind of one by one, but also y'all, you know how it goes. Shit overlaps. So we're going to just start with a summary of all 3 films and then go from there. So the first one, 4 Weddings and a Funeral. And remember, please, these are all from Google. We like to Google the summaries because everybody Googles and we like to know what Google has to say. Lovable Englishman Charles and his group of friends seem to be unlucky in love. When Charles meets beautiful American named Carrie at a wedding, he thinks his luck may have changed. But after one magical night, Carrie returns to the States, ending what might have been. As Charles and Carrie's paths continue to cross over a handful of nuptials and one funeral, he comes to believe that they are meant to be together, even if their timing always seems to be off. Back when Hugh Grant was quite adorable.
Oh, Hugh.
Right? This movie was released March 9th, 1994. And at the time, the New York Times called it a multi-tiered confection with a romantic spirit and an enchantingly pretty veneer. Elegant, festive, and very, very funny. This deft comedy also constitutes a remarkable tightrope act of the part of Mike Newell, who directed, and Richard Curtis, the screenwriter. Okay, so that's 4 Weddings and a Funeral. So that's 1994. We're making all these time plot points on purpose.
Ooh, 94. Oh my gosh. This
That was
is very interesting.
this is gonna hurt what I'm gonna say next, Bridget, and I apologize in advance. That is the day
Yep.
before March 9th, day before my 10th birthday.
Oh gosh. And trippy thing. I mean, I was already an adult. This was a month before I got in a serious car accident, which changed my life, but also I ended up watching a lot of rom-coms for a long time because I was situated in beds and couches. So it
Yeah.
came probably into my VCR, or I think it was probably still VCRs. Yeah, it came into my
Yeah.
VCR
Yeah.
so it was like programming me while I couldn't do much of anything. So
Right.
that's where and it was Hugh Grant's phase of being the bumbling, lovable,
Mhm.
quirky Englishman. You know, the whole shtick of him that he then pivoted into the evil guy later. But
Yeah. This
this
was
was his
his.
funny. So like that was his whole genre. Like
Yeah.
he was what made the movie. I mean, that was
And made women everywhere believe they needed to fall in love with a Brit.
yes, exactly.
Oh,
Much
he's so
like a
charming.
Carrie,
Yeah.
Carrie the American, who
Yeah.
I've met in person. Which
Oh, I love that.
side story, I lived in Los Angeles for years, and you know, you see a lot of famous people, right? And I came out of my door stoop and she was standing there and she asked me for directions. And I
Oh,
was like totally starstruck. Like, I see famous people all the time. I should be fine. And I was just like Hugh Grant in the movie. I was just like, blah,
yeah.
blah, blah, blah. You know, like I felt just like him.
I love that. Oh my gosh, that's the best. Okay, so our next movie takes us to the year of 1997, My Best Friend's Wedding. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
summary. Childhood friends Julianne Potter and Michael O'Neill had a deal to marry each other if they were still single by age 28. Offensive. Now, 4 days before her 28th birthday, wait, what? Now, 4 days before her 28th birthday, O'Neill announces that he's marrying a gorgeous 20-year-old named Kimberly. Suddenly realizing that she's actually in love with him, Julianne vows to stop the wedding at all costs. However, when she's appointed maid of honor, things get even more complex. Interesting to me because the wedding is also in 4 days. So
I
he's
was gonna
getting
say,
married
like,
on her birthday.
how, like, what a shitty thing to do to your friend. Like, you're my bestie, but I love you so much, I'm gonna get married to some stranger you've never met who's really freaking young and much cuter than you on your birthday.
On
But
your
bam,
birthday. Yeah, you're welcome, dear. Okay, so
you're
like I
not
said,
good enough, Julia
you're not
Roberts. Yeah,
on it.
that's
God,
it.
if Julia
That's
Roberts isn't good enough, we are all in trouble.
right. I know, seriously.
Like I said, this movie released in 1997. It was a summer release, June 20, perfect summer bride, June weddings. And at the time, Roger Ebert had this to say. One of the pleasures of Ronald Bass's screenplay is the way it subverts the usual comic formulas that would fuel a plot like this. It makes the Julia Roberts character sympathetic at first, but eventually her behavior shades into cruel meddling. It gives Kimmy Wallace, the fiance, goodness and warmth instead of a ditzy facade. It makes Michael an intelligent player in the drama rather than the easily manipulated male we might expect. And out of left field, it brings in another character, George, who is Julianne's editor, gay and playfully wise. Good job,
Playfully
Roger.
gay.
Yeah, good job, Roger Ebert. So glad you won a Pulitzer. It's so great.
I know, right? And it seemed a little feminist for him to say some of those things. I don't know.
Which is surprising because he is notoriously
Right?
misogynist, is what you know what I mean?
I've heard you talk about this on the podcast, so I was like, "Whoa, he kind of this movie threw him for a loop."
Every time we get a review from him where I'm just like, oh my God, I feel like this is out of character and probably why you won a Pulitzer.
Yep. Exactly.
Clearly I'm bitter. Okay, and our last film was released last, but actually is set in the 80s, The Wedding Singer. Specifically set in 1985, Adam Sandler plays a nice guy with a broken heart who's stuck in one of the most romantic jobs in the world, a wedding singer. Sorry, that's so funny. I don't think a wedding singer being a romantic job. He loses all hope when he is abandoned at the altar by his fiancée. He meets a young woman named Julia who enlists his help to plan her wedding. He falls in love with her and must win her over before she gets married. This film released in February 13th, 1998. And here we go. Roger Ebert had this. He gave it 1 star.
What?
And said, the plot is so familiar, the end credits should have issued a blanket thank you to a century of Hollywood love coms.
Oh, please.
It's like, Roger,
But that's
What?
the point. It's like it's the 80s. The 80s were predictable. That's like they were playing on the whole predictability of it. That's the point.
Exactly. That's the point.
Because
Sometimes,
there's all these I was in high school in
yeah.
85. So I actually my life looked very similar to like the trends and everything. And looking at that going, "Oh yeah, this is totally like how like there's little pop culture references that they threw in that are only funny if you knew them, I feel like
Okay.
too."
Okay.
And so yeah, it's like they were making fun of the 80s jokes, but if you didn't know those jokes, then it's very just sort of
Yeah.
formulaic, like it doesn't make sense. You have to know the
Yeah.
context for that movie.
Yeah, and I feel like that's just kind of Adam Sandler's vibe anyway. Like he
Yeah.
very much is like I came up in the 80s and that influences all of my work until you
Yeah.
get into his more recent stuff. But
Yep.
like he's got a very specific tone to him,
Hmm.
and it's what why are you gonna argue? You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
let's
like
say
if you didn't see that SNL skit or something that he was in, then you're not going to get it. And so he'll reference like the skit or something,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so
So all of these movies share a theme. It's timing. They share a lot. There's a lot of themes. There's a lot of themes throughout these movies, but timing is the main theme. And while Charles and Carrie and Robbie Hart and Julia end up together despite their ill-timed meetings and missteps, Jules and Michael do not. And Julianne in
Mhm.
My Best Friend's Wedding is referred to as Jules. So throughout this episode, we will be referring to Julia from The Wedding Singer, Jules from My Best Friend's Wedding,
Yeah.
not to be confused with your host.
Yes, Julia and Jules.
It's going to be a great time. Buckle up, everybody. Here we go.
Buckle up for the Julias.
I want to know what your thoughts are on how these movies, specifically weddings, how do you think these movies contribute to the idea of love?
Oof, deep. Okay. So, well, I sort of feel like we have two movies that are kind of similar,
Mm-hmm.
and then one is sort of an offshoot, an
Yeah.
unpredictable offshoot, which is good.
Yeah.
So, there's like the same songs in some of these movies because that was a
Yes.
thing in the 90s. They would use like the same song. So you listen to these movies and you're identifiable, like, oh, they're
Mm-hmm.
playing the same at last when they dance to their wedding,
Mm-hmm.
which I tried to have be my wedding song in my first marriage. And that didn't even work out. The song
Oh.
didn't even work out. They were playing our song and they forgot about us. So I
Oh.
was like, that dream was like piped into me of Etta
Yeah.
James at last. Like, this is what and then the whole wedding dress montage that all these movies have in common. You always have to have a wedding dress montage.
Yes.
So just all of these things of like what we're supposed to aspire to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would think so the first one was Four Weddings and a Funeral. The interesting thing is it's also the whole thing is in England. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
different to relate to culturally as an American, right? And there's this one character who's the American. They literally call her Carrie, the American girl.
Yeah.
She's, kind of stepping into their world and sort of almost speaking with like an English accent at
Yeah.
times, kind of to look more British or more worldly, rather than occasionally like her little girl from the South voice comes out. But that movie is literally, it's like like you said in the description of it from Google, was sort of this misfit bunch of people that can't get their act together and they have to go to all these weddings, but they're all best friends, right?
Yeah.
And they're all kind of like, none of them are maybe going to get married or find the one or whatever. So we've kind of almost like given up on them as characters, like from the beginning, and they've kind of got each other. And then, sort of the least likely one in a way is Hugh Grant's character. I can't
Mm-hmm.
think of his name right now, but like he's sort of the least likely one that you'd think would fall for somebody. And of course, he falls for someone unavailable. So that's another trope that goes in there.
And I love that trope, Bridget.
It's my whole life. That trope is yeah, till forever, pretty much, till I got this my husband of many years now. But yeah, that trope of like the unattainable, that's like part of what creates the drama and the friction in
Yeah.
the story of romance, right? And so, but then we've got like multiple unrequited characters in Four Weddings and a Funeral that we find out about down the road. So that's sort of like the unrequited love. That's what you're supposed to go for. It's supposed to be hard. you know, but you're also supposed to get married and find the one, right? Or there's something like wrong with you. That's
Yeah.
right. There's very much like, what's wrong with all of us? Why can't we be the ones? Um, and there's even people a lot in that movie that have given up and then they like turn. There's the one character that Lydia Jane Hibbard, whatever, she gets married. She's like a bachelorette and she's joking. She's like, no, yeah, not a bachelorette. She's a maid of honor or
Maid of
whatever.
honor. Yeah.
And she's like joking, like, I was promised sex, you know, I'm at the wedding. And she's like, here, what am I doing here? And then the person she turns to, she's like, not you. And then they end up getting married. It's
Yeah.
like this great, like, so even she's given up, right? So it's like things are working out basically for everybody around them except this group of friends cannot get it together, right? And
Right.
so that's kind of the whole thing. And then of course, you know, it all ends up in some that he ends up getting the girl in the end, right? Of course, through
Yeah.
ridiculous circumstances and countries and travel in time. It's like no matter what,
Withering looks, because Hugh
it's the
Grant
one. He
definitely
knew
can
it was
like,
the one and the whole
uh-huh.
thing, right? We don't think about logistics. Even logistics back then were way crazy. We had no social media, we had no cell phones, we had no text messaging. Like,
Right.
how did they even stay in communication? Who knows? Um, so that's that story. And then the next one is the best friend's wedding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that one like deviates from the norm, which is great because again, we think it's about, like you mentioned, timing. We think it's about, oh gosh, it's just 4 days before my birthday, and he's gonna call. Oh my gosh, weird timing. I'm not ready to get proposed to, whatever. And then he throws her this zinger and says, "Come be my best man at this wedding."
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it's just, oh, if I would have just only, you know, been ready sooner or whatever. And it's like the ultimate theme of that is it's not timing, it's like it's not you.
Right.
And you know, we have to admit that. So we're also sold this trope in movies like it's just timing and eventually it works out. And usually there's some kind of a love triangle and things like that involved, which is another gotta love a love triangle.
Gotta
But
love a love triangle.
you know, we think also we have to like, oh, we'll just boot her out of the way because they're not really supposed to be together. It's supposed to be, you know, us and things like that. And so that's like, yeah, we find out if it's not timing, gay best friend is actually kind of the one that's like the in the hero's journey or whatever. He's like the
Yeah.
voice of reason. He's the like, let's create like an actual ridiculous scenario where I'm going to pose as your boyfriend. I'm going to call you kitten and be all mushy with you and
Yeah.
ridiculous and win over the entire family singing at karaoke. And then, you know, he's the one that's like at the end of the day, like, this is not, you're
Mm-hmm.
doing some crazy stuff here,
Mm-hmm.
Jules. Like, what are you
Mm-hmm.
doing? And then, you know, the wedding singer, same thing. It's like, it's not timing, you know, it's
Yeah.
just like being with the wrong people, picking the
Right.
wrong people, but like thinking you're supposed to get married, thinking you're supposed to do the right thing. Um, Julia in that movie, who thank goodness she doesn't marry her other man because she'd be Julia Gulia.
Julia, so
I've also met
bad.
him in person, which is really weird.
Oh, how
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. A friend of mine worked for him, so yeah, I've known him in person, which is weird. But that like her mom's like, he's a catch, you know. She says all these things. We're supposed to go be with the catch who has
Yeah.
like money, even though like she doesn't even know he's cheating on her,
Right.
and this Wall Street guy, and you know, just gonna treat her like crap. Like she doesn't know that she's just this simple girl who just wants to, you know, get married.
Because he love bombs her
Yeah.
like all the time. And like it's interesting because you said supposed to be married and fall in love a couple of times. And I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, that's literally the message. You are
Yep.
supposed to want this.
Yep.
Even if it's not, even if it's not the thing. Because one of the things about like just Hugh Grant movie rom-coms in general is that he's so longing for love. And you're just like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
baby, you're cute. Stop it. Because like, so like in my best friend's wedding, and she's like, I'm realizing that it's supposed to be me and Michael. And you're like, but do you think it is though? But like,
Mm-hmm.
do you? Is it just that now someone else is playing with your toy? So like you're feeling threatened and want to try and keep him? And
Yes.
like with the wedding singer, I hate that guy. I forget his first name, Gulia, because he love bomb. He's like, look, babe, I bought you a 7-disc CD changing player and like buys expensive meals. And his whole thing is like, well, I'm going to marry the one that I know isn't going to steal all my money. And you're just like, what?
Yeah, she's like the nice, simple girl. She's so like, what's interesting about her character development, she never goes beyond being the nice, simple girl, really.
Right.
Like, and I'm kind of, in a way, I'm like, what's her real ambition? Like, other than
Mhm.
getting married, we don't really ever find that out. So
No, we don't.
most other people in the other movies, they're like successful, career people. They're doing well, like, but she's just like this lost little lamb, and young
Waiting,
and
waiting tables
just
at wedding
waiting,
parties.
waiting tables. Yeah. And we don't really know what her passion is. Like, what's she going to
Mm-mm.
go do? I mean, other than get married. And I mean, not that that's not enough. I'm not saying that. It's just interesting character wise because she falls prey to him because he's a little bit, just he's controlling her and even like the love bombing, like you're saying, he's just like, oh, I'm gonna pick like the loyal wife who's not gonna take
Mm-hmm.
my money, but I'm gonna go like be with all these other women because that's what I gotta do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, Robbie's the romantic, whatever we that's so funny that it said the most romantic job or whatever.
I know. It's like, I'm
Um,
sorry. Is wedding singing a romantic job?
I mean, in the 80s, yeah, because yeah, we didn't have people weren't DJing, they were actually wedding singing, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
funny. Um, yeah, put it, doing the greatest hits, doing the cover band stuff, whatever.
Yeah. The other thing too that I think is interesting about these three movies and our three leading, like our main leading ladies, Carrie, Julia, and Jules, is that Jules is the only one who's sort of like presented as like the non-emotional female.
Mhm.
And she's like, they work really hard to set her up to be the one who the only way she would ever get married is because of a pact type
Yeah.
of thing, which kind of, I mean, same. Like,
Well, even like,
but I
she's
cry because there's a line where she's like, oh, and I cried for like the third time in my life. I'm like, only 3 times? I cried 3 times today.
right? They're setting her up as it's kind of the either career or love path
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
clearly she's a food critic. She's doing really well. She's like she goes in this restaurant, everybody's afraid of her because she's about to give the review. So she clearly has this power and this career and she's doing well. And that's why she related to Michael because he's got his career and they were kind of like parallel lives in this sense. And yeah, making that pact and that bet, I love it. It's like, yeah, 20, if we don't get married at 28, like that's old, first of all. But you know what? Back in the day, that was old. Now
Yeah.
it's like people are having babies in their 40s. That wasn't even, nobody thought of that in the 90s. So yeah, she was already a spinster. She was already getting, used up. And then they kind of it's interesting also that the like what makes her not attractive, it seems like, is her because she dresses more masculine. She's
Mm-hmm.
um never wears heels, whatever. And then even like when Kimmy gives her the wedding dress thing, she's all awkward in it and not used to wearing feminine clothes or something. And they act as it's weird how that's portrayed to me.
Yeah.
This really triggered me in a way that it was like Kimmy's like the younger, much younger person, like
Mm-hmm.
still in college, whatever, doesn't even know what she's doing with her life. And that's kind of that he's going to swoop in and sort of be the hero for her. And sort of playing it like, strong women don't get the relationship. Strong women don't need a
Right.
relationship or they don't even get to have one because they have no feelings and they're
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of played that way. Like you're either here's your options, or you're either soft and feminine and marriage material. And
Mm-hmm.
definitely for me, growing up in the 80s and into the 90s, like I was fed a lot of that by my dad and by society, that it was just like, oh, you have to present this particular way, or you have to be more, don't be so outspoken and things like
Right.
that.
Right. And I feel like these movies sort of lend themselves to that messaging because
Mm.
we'll get more into my best friend's wedding, but just to like pre teaser to that conversation, You really, like you were saying, you really do have this. She'd rather be at the baseball game than the bridal shower. She'd, you
Yeah.
know, she's not really like worrisome about like the pretty things. She's got like this sort of like, she's fine by herself, is
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I'm thinking the
She,
baseball game even, it's like she's portrayed as it's like it's kind of attractive. Like she's walking around with this tray of beers and she's like, I don't know, I've just got moves you've never seen or whatever. She's like making all these little jokes and stuff. Like she's like got this sexual power to her almost over all these men. Of course, it's all men sitting in the box at the baseball thing. And she's
right,
the only and she's the best man, which is kind of interesting. But then it's like still it's like, but that's not the woman you're gonna marry. You're never
right.
gonna marry the woman who's the like strong, confident, sexually aware like person. You're gonna marry the one that like, I don't know, like tell me what to do
Sure, I'll
person, you
drop
know.
out of college for you.
I'll drop out of college, I'll follow you wherever you
I'll
go.
follow you wherever you go. I know you don't make a ton of money and my daddy's a billionaire. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, You've heard me mention that I am now a contributor to Jennifer Magazine, so I want to tell you a little bit about the publication. Jennifer Magazine supports a strong community of women and non-binary people who are challenging the status quo of ageism, choosing conscious consumption over status seeking, supporting brands that align with their values of inclusion, stepping into the empowerment found in self-expression, and talking about it. If you're tired of reading publications that seem to miss the mark when it comes to coverage of women, aging, and the gender binary, publications that are rooted in internalized racism and misogyny, then Jennifer Magazine is the publication for you. The publisher of Jennifer Magazine was once told that there's concern that Jennifer Magazine misses the mark, that it's not something people are asking for. And you know what? It's hard to ask for something when you don't know that something has been missing from your life. You can read Jennifer Magazine at jennifermag.com. There you can purchase monthly issues or even join their annual subscription and receive exclusive discounts. Do you get really excited that your favorite book was adapted for screen, only to watch it and feel completely let down? Are you a person who refuses to watch the screen adaptation because you know the movie gods got it wrong? I'm Julia Washington, host of Jelly Pop's Book Club, where we read book-to-screen adaptations and compare them to their screen counterparts. We've covered books like Normal People by Sally Rooney, Water for Elephants, and Are You There, God? It's me, Margaret. We even host a live monthly book club where we have read books like The Other Black Girl, The Joy Luck Club, and The Sun is Also a Star. Sometimes we even discuss books we wish would be adapted, offer suggestions on what needs to stay, and who should be cast. So if you're someone who thinks, I can't believe they did this to this book, or screams at a screen about the changes that make no sense at all, then this might be the show for you. You can find Jelly Pop's Book Club on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or visit our website, popculturemakesmejealous.com. Okay, so let's get into our best friend's wedding conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In my best friend's wedding, Kimmy, who's played by Cameron Diaz, is 20 years old. 20 years old. And this idea that Michael and Jules made a pact that if they weren't married by 28, they'd marry each other. Like by 2023 standards, come on, guys.
I know, right?
You know what I mean? But it's 1997.
How would we rewrite this?
How would we, exactly?
40.
If I'm 65 and not married yet, like maybe, like, so I want to talk about how age impacts our beliefs about romantic timelines and how My Best Friend's Wedding feeds into that. Because when I was rewatching it, I was like, oh, you have a book tour. You have this super successful like food critic career at 28. You guys like met you met in college, but then like hooked up your sophomore year, dated for a month, she decided no thanks. So you're trying to tell me, and granted, my generation, we graduated college and then 2 years later, the economy tanked. So everyone was like, what? We're unemployed? Why?
We were promised jobs.
Yeah. But at the time, because I remember watching this in the movie theater, I remember thinking, God, I can't wait to be like 28 and super successful and like have a best friend who's like a guy. Like it was literally like, this is going to be so great. This is
Yep.
adulthood and it's going to be so great. And then now I'm like pushing 40 and I'm watching this movie and I was like, y'all, nobody told us that sometimes you don't have your career at 28.
Right? Right? No, wait. But nobody told me that. I like, how is she already this successful? Like, how is she
At
already this
28. Yeah,
established?
like how did you do it?
Right?
How did you do it? Did
I
you
was
know a
in
friend?
journalism school around that age. So I was definitely having that, like, oh, this could be me. I could be like this food critic
Yeah.
traveling the world. Like, cool, I can be her. And then I'm like, well, I guess I'll have to be a spinster. Like, I guess that's what I have to choose because,
And all
so
the you're right, and the traveling too, because they
yeah.
reference their trips together all the time. And you're
Yeah.
just like,
Mhm.
how the shit did you go like 4 months not seeing each other and not knowing he met someone, but then also have 20 years of friendship in 9 years?
Right. Right. So the age thing. So we have the 28-year-old portrayed as the old maid, and then we have the 20-year-old as like promise and like, I don't and then Michael is 28, so he's 8 years older, but that's a lot in the 20s. That's a lot
Yeah,
of a
because
gap,
she's
right?
very young in her, she's a young
She's
20
very
even.
young and she's
Like,
very privileged and she's, very sheltered. And even that, like she grows in the movie, like they show her coming out of her shell. Like Jules
mhm,
actually brings her out in these beautiful ways. That's the unpredictability where he said in the review where he's like, instead of being the meek little whatever, she's got this surprising depth to her and the
mhm,
surprising warmth and compassion. And so that's, they could have, if they would play into the her being the evil young girl or whatever, and then Jules would get the guy at the end of the day, right? But they had to spin it this other way. But there's still this pressure around age and Jules's character looking at Kimmy and going, "Oh, I'm already old," and she's 28. I'm like,
yeah.
she's not even 28. In a couple of days, she'll be 28, right? So it's like she's still 27. Um, yeah, how is that
It's
like not
interesting.
enough, right?
Yeah, because it's interesting because it's like even in in Kimmy's world, she's so dedicated to him now, and like going to college to get your MRS degree, I feel like is so my mother's generation, because I think our parents are similarly aged. Like even though there's a age gap between us, my parents got married young and then had kids in their 30s.
Mhm.
Um there's still this sort of like underlying tone that the expectation is that you just really only do go to college to get your MRS degree. Like, sure, go to college. Like, women can be educated now. Woohoo, yay.
Mhm.
But that underlying tone is still there. And I don't know if you do TikTok, but I definitely fell down the role of Bama Rush when
Oh.
like Bama Rush was happening. And I was like, this just feels very much like, look at me, I'll be your perfect wife, even though they're in college, right? Like, so that's kind of where I'm come
Mhm.
to like the end of like, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter that it's 2023 or 1997. That
Yep.
underlying message is still like, you're going to meet someone in college and you're going to get married.
Yeah, that's where you meet your husband. It's just, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be an educated wife, so we have to put you through college, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Who cares if you have an art degree from Smith? Who the fuck cares? You have an art degree from Smith. That's all I care about is you're educated. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
right, right.
and she doesn't,
Yeah.
Kimmy doesn't know. She's 20. What if she wakes up in 5 years and is when her brain's done forming and
When her her
is
brain
like,
is still not cooked and she's, like, getting married
she's
and
like,
yeah,
sure, let's have a big wedding. I'll follow you around the country to watch baseball.
to
I
go
mean,
in some Motel 6s or whatever. What did she say? Like, the Embassy
the
Suites or
embassy suites.
whatever with the
I was like, hey, I'll follow you around the country to watch baseball. I like baseball. Baseball is a sport that if I had unlimited funds, I would go to every single game.
Could have been
But
his
that's not
wife.
what I thought at 20.
Can we rewrite this for the modern day? And then you're the best friend and you actually end up getting married because he's like, I want somebody who likes the same things as me. Of course.
I would like an update. I would like to see where they all are now, right? Like bring them in
Right?
now. They've
What
been
are they
like,
doing
what are
now?
they doing now? Because I think Cameron Diaz is retired from acting. Who cares? Come back for the reboot.
Of course, they'd probably play it because she has the gay best friend. They'd probably play it like she becomes a lesbian because, of course, like that's what that meant, that she didn't want to be with him and whatever. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
she's just not into men. Like she's, of course, she's going to pivot and
Yeah.
be this, some power lesbian journalism couple owning a magazine or something.
Right. Right. They're like, we took the world by storm.
Media conglomerate. I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah.
something. Yeah.
I did love though that like she finds solace in comfort in this this very kind and caring man named George. I
Yeah.
also recently realized, Bridget, that all of my safe spaces have been curated by gay men. So it didn't occur to me until we were talking about some
Yep.
family members and friends and I had been having this parallel conversation because I hate leaving the house. And then it's like, well, like, why do you hate leaving the house? And
I
then
hear
you start peeling back the layers. It's like, oh, all the places that I absolutely loved and felt the safest in and felt the most cared for in were all curated by gay men.
Yep. I mean, honestly, that is an interesting, because I like that he's more than just like the gay best friend in this movie. He's like a pivotal
Yeah.
character in this movie. He is like I said, he's the voice of reason. He's the
Mm-hmm.
is he old? We feel like he's older than her.
I feel
He's
like
like
he's
older,
older.
wiser.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he's like almost like mentoring her in life. Like he'll support her to the ridiculous end. He just shows up at the hotel room,
Mm-hmm.
like to help her out. He um does all these ridiculous things, like anything to support her. And I think that's like the greatest thing is like
Mm-hmm.
the what they always say is like, don't, make sure when you're entering a relationship, like don't ditch your friends, because you're like the gay best friend's really going to have your back when the shit goes down, because the shit's probably going to go down even if it's just temporary. You know what I mean? The
Yeah.
shit's going to go down somewhere. um yeah,
And
and I
he
just
even you see it in Michael's face when he's like, oh, George, when she's like, George, oh yeah, I guess he's kind of my best friend now. And you see Michael's face kind of drop and you're like,
yeah.
because she talks to him every day, Michael. What are you doing? Where have you
Well,
been?
that's what's interesting. It is interesting, even the term of best friend, that it's like that. How, again, like we said, how would she
Mhm.
not know that he didn't have a girlfriend? I guess this is like social media. We would just know, like, that's the base. We can at least like
Yeah.
baseline keep in check with somebody. But if you kind of don't talk to somebody for a while, and maybe he thought of the pact and was like, oh, we're close to the pact. And do I really want to, because it's clear that he has feelings romantically for Jules too. Like
Right.
wasn't over it, even to the point of barely getting to the altar. He was very confused and
Yeah.
conflicted.
Yeah.
But ultimately it was like she just wanted to win, is what it felt like too. She just wanted to win him, and she couldn't deal with the fact that someone else was winning him, especially
Mm-hmm.
somebody younger and blonder and cuter and whatever, all the things.
Mm-hmm.
um, that kicks in a real gear, and it
Uh,
kicks in like the desperation. And I don't like that they're playing that at 28 she's this desperate woman. Like she
yeah.
chose too. She chose like career. She's done all these things that have made it hard for her to have a relationship again. Like I said, in today's times, it would be easier for her because we have all
Mm-hmm.
these ways to stay connected we didn't have in the 90s. So long distance worked a lot better. Works a lot better now. But yeah, she's not old.
No. And that's the crazy thing. And then too, with Kimmy being 20, it's like, you gotta be married by 20. If you're not married by 20, you've got a problem.
Right? Yeah.
No. My
Yeah.
my mom got married at 21. She's gonna listen to this and yell at me.
Well, it is interesting though that like college to marriage pipeline, if you will, like
Mm-hmm.
that they were like, oh, you already got one. We could just take you out of college right now. Like, it's cool.
Yeah,
We
because
scored
she
you. We
does.
snared you one. Not even
Yeah,
in college. He's older. Even better. Like,
even better. Because she does say, oh, I'm not going back next semester. And you're like, but you're so close.
right.
Like, you're so close. What's 1 year?
And why is he not like wanting her to go back to school? Like,
So here's a note I
that's
wrote
weird.
down. Michael's love for Kimmy is all about his needs. So like
It
he
is.
loves that she will let him hold her for as long as he wants in a hug.
Yep. Yep.
He loves that she'll travel around with him in their first years of marriage when he's essentially doing an entry level career. Like he's
Right.
at an entry level point in his career versus Jules, who's very accomplished.
Yeah.
So like none of this love is actually about them as a couple or Kimmy. It's all
Yep.
about Michael and Michael's needs. And I was like, I can't believe I still love this movie, but I'm so mad.
Well, that you know what that is too? It's like she makes him feel more like a man or more strong or
Mm-hmm.
more what he thinks a man should be, especially because he's in sports, which is
Yeah.
especially in the 90s, much more toxic masculine world than it is now. Um, even it still is now, but let's say back then, especially, it was like he
Yeah.
had to like prove his worth as a man. So it's like part of his cred to have this young girl on his arm and everything. It like boosts his, I'm sure it's good for his career. I'm sure it's good for the optics, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, all about his needs, like you said. That's really valid.
Makes me so cranky. My best friend's wedding compared to Wedding Singer. We're talking about two different types of love tropes and timelines, and I'm not mad at
Yep.
it. But
Mm-hmm.
while they are both centered around weddings, my best friend's wedding, like we've talked about, doesn't result in the main character Jules getting the desired outcome. We expect
Yep.
her to walk away with Michael in the end. She does not. It's shaking up this idea about what rom-com should be. The Wedding Singer, however, does result in our two main characters ending up together, which honestly is like one of my favorite scenes in fucking movie history.
I love
Like I
it.
fucking love that scene so hard at the end. And it's like because it's like here's this big romantic gesture, and who doesn't? I mean, if you don't want a big romantic gesture and that's not your vibe, totally fine, fair, got it. But me, that's not me. I
I
need it.
and the fact that Billy Idol's a part of it, like, come
the,
on,
like that's
even better.
the dream. Like, oh my god. Time and time again, my best friend's wedding serves up these big gestures and they're not received. They get
Mm-hmm.
rebuffed. And the
Yep.
audience allegiance does start to shift because at first you're like, yeah, I want Michael and Jules to be together. And then you're like, actually, I think I really want Michael and Kimmy to be together, even though I need her brain to finish developing. But
Yeah.
when Robbie Hart is on the same plane singing to Julia through the intercom, the audience melts. We walk away feeling warm and happy and fuzzy, and it gives us all the things that we need. So the audience essentially falls out of love with Jules and in love with Julia. And it leaves me wondering, what are the messages? And we've kind of touched on them quite a bit already, but let's hone in a little bit more. What are the
Mm-hmm.
messages behind the characters, Jules versus Julia?
Mm. Interesting.
Because what you said earlier really hit, I think. You know, Julia doesn't really have a lot. She's very kind. She's very sweet. But what's her
Yeah.
ambition? She doesn't have
Yeah.
ambition.
She doesn't have ambition. And she, like I said, she's very simple, but I think Robbie's also very simple. So she like
Mhm.
really wants a simple life, but she's the people around her. This is interesting. She's sort of like the Kimmy, but the
Mhm.
people around her are sort of shepherding her into here's what your life should be. He's a good
Yeah.
man. Go after him. Even Julia's best friend is the more promiscuous one, and you know, sort of Madonna vibe about her, which I love. Um, she's the one kind of getting her to like do more things, you know. And so like she's kind of getting pushed around by everybody and not able to really ask for what she wants.
Mhm.
So that's interesting is that she's, and I don't know like age wise too where she
Yeah, they
lives in the
don't
spectrum,
really
but
give us
yeah,
that,
but
but we
it's
do know they're old enough to go to clubs.
yeah, it feels like Robbie's older than her, but it's definitely like she doesn't know who she is yet. She's not like a full cooked human, it feels like. And so she's getting pushed around, and like Robbie coming into her life is sort of permission to go like, I could have the life I want. And I'm just
Mhm.
kind of learning what that is. And one part of what that is to have somebody really amazing to share my life with instead of just
Yeah.
what I'm supposed to do and
Yeah.
who I'm supposed to do it with. That it's so what that it's the wedding singer. Like how freaking cool. She loves everything about him. Like as a friend, they're besties, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's like, yeah. So underneath that, Julia is like, she doesn't know she, you know, but then the other Jules is like very clear about who she is, really strong, powerful, dominant, whatever. But like, oops, I forgot to have a husband. Like maybe I should
Yeah.
backtrack on that. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should listen to other people. Maybe I should have listened to other people all along. Like she starts doubting that confidence in herself because it's like, oh, something's wrong with me or missing,
Mhm.
you know? And even like she's trying to get back. Like I think Kimmy represents what Jules could have had. Like, oh, I was with
Yes.
him in college. I could have been that. Why couldn't I have just been that person? Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with me? And it's like, that's the point, is nothing's wrong with you.
Yeah, yeah. I like your comparison about how Kimmy and Julia are, seem like very similar because
Yeah.
I feel like that dead on because they're both sweet and gentle and kind and loving and warm and welcoming. And like you said, huge contrast to Jules. So for me, I'm like, oh, the message is don't take up a lot of space, be very warm, be very welcoming, be very kind and generous. And that is what will land you your perfect partner.
Be
Specifically in
very
the
blonde.
yes, yes.
Very white, very blonde, very tiny, very all the things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is kind of hard because it's like, I don't know about you, but I was raised in I get told I'm too loud all the time, but I'm
Oh.
also the youngest. So it's kind of like I'm loud because all of you were talking and I had to fucking make noise to be heard. Sorry,
Mhm.
it's not my fault. But we were raised in a house to have opinions and to discuss things, and discourse is normal, and read the newspaper. And I don't read
That's
the
great.
newspaper now because it's depressing, but everything that Julia and Kimmy are, I am not. Minus that I do think I have had people mention, like um the kind, like the warmth stuff, but like initially people are like, I didn't know if you liked me. It's like, I'm sorry, my face looks like this. It looks like it hates everybody.
I mean,
But
yeah, it's similar to Jules. You have,
yeah.
the journalistic brain. You have the like you're processing information, you're taking in, you're like, how does this relate to this? You're digging deeper all the time,
Yeah, Jules to me was like everyone's sad that she doesn't get the guy, and I'm over here, I'm like, why do I relate so hard to Jules? And not because she didn't get the guy,
Yeah.
but because she's got opinions, she's determined and motivated and all these things. But my best friend's wedding told me that being that way means I will die alone.
Exactly. And I mean, yeah, it was like I said, I mean, that's literally what we're conditioned is like you can do anything you want. Barbie, tie this into the Barbie movie, right? But it was
Mm-hmm.
like growing up with that, it's like you could be anything you want. You could do anything you want in the world. And then suddenly you're like, wait a minute, but am I supposed to want this? Or am I just feeling like I'm incomplete if I don't have a relationship? Or like, what is that? Right. And
Yeah. And there wasn't really a whole lot of like, hey, you can be whatever you want, but also be whatever you want means do everything that your mom's generation couldn't have. Don't figure it out for yourself.
yeah,
You need to have what we wanted and weren't allowed to have. Kind of like
yep,
that's how I'm
yep.
feeling now, where it's like, well, maybe I should have sat down and actually like thought about it a little deeper. Like you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
my
Well,
go
yeah,
ahead.
which is interesting. Thinking of these families, like the families, how they support these characters too, right? We never
Mm-hmm.
really know anything about, I mean, we know everything about Kimmy's family, and that's really
Mm-hmm.
mostly what we know. But it's like, it's funny that they'd be supporting her in this, especially when they're so wealthy. And they're basically going to have to carry his ass because he doesn't make very much money.
Right.
And or her money will have to carry his ass. But it seems like they're just like fine with whatever she does, which is really, and that's maybe they're like, oh, break the generational trauma of you don't have to marry, into these certain families to sort of create this lineage in this particular way. Cause I mean, they're so wealthy. It was all like arranged marriages for them and stuff before, right?
Truly.
So they're like, we're going to be better parents, and this is how we're going to let our kid do whatever she wants, right? And then we have that again in the Wedding Singer. The mom of Julia is like, no, this is what you should do. This is good parenting, is I'm going to make sure. She like literally takes her by the shoulders and like, he's a catch, you go marry him. Like,
Right.
what are you doing? Like, okay, so it's that, who are we listening to?
Right. Cause that scene in The Wedding Singer when she's trying on the dress and she's like, I'm gonna be
I
Mrs.
love
Julia
that.
Gulia. And she just starts weeping. And you're like, heartbreak. And then she's like, I'm Mrs. Robbie Hart. I'm
It's so
Julia Hart. And
cute.
she's so happy. It's like that's the first time she's ever considered what she wanted for
That's
herself.
exactly what I was thinking. That scene is like a pivotal moment of everybody's pushing me around. I don't know how to speak up because I don't really, again, because she doesn't really know herself. It feels like
Mhm.
everybody has decided who she is. Glenn decides what she should wear. I mean,
Oh,
it's just
Glenn, that's his name. Glenn
Glenn.
Gulia.
It just came up to me. It just hit me. Mr. Miami Vice, which I
Yeah.
freaking love. I love that whole thing, that whole shtick.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, he decides who she gets to be or whatever, and
Mhm.
then there's that moment in the wedding dress, like you said, that's like the come to something, not
Yeah.
Beyonce, but some 80s version of that. Come to
Yeah.
Madonna moment.
It's her
I don't know.
Madonna moment.
It's her Madonna moment. She's in her virginal bride dress, and she's like, "Nope."
She's like, how can I do
What
this?
would really make me happy? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Oh.
then there's timing stuff, which you have to throw in because, of course, it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to work out right away, and there's got to be some timing stuff, and you
He
know,
sees her when she's Robbie Hart sees her when she's happy, and he just assumes, because I do
yeah.
appreciate that he's like, she needs to know he's cheating, like this
How
is
many
not
how many
okay.
times do they like go to each other's houses and they never figure it out? This is what like the drama of movies
The
where you're like,
drama, oh
oh,
my
just
god.
just go up there. You don't know what's happening. Like
Right.
people always assume they know what's happening. It's so
Mm-hmm.
funny. Like that can make a movie go on for 5 more scenes because they never get to the conversation because they're making shit
Right.
up all the time.
Right. I've noticed now in my advanced age, air quotes, because it's not advanced, but society keeps telling me that it is.
You're not.
That I like, I'll start like when it's like, okay, this is just here to help to make it more conflict, but we don't need it. I just skim through it. Books, movies, I don't give a shit anymore. I'm just like, okay, that just happened. Like you said, we're gonna have 5 more scenes of back and forth that isn't necessary. So I'm just
Like
gonna
not
skip.
necessary. I know. Like, why do we get so many of those?
It's like the person in charge is like, we need 3 more pages of
Well,
missed
they have to give it like a
connections.
will they, won't they quality.
Mm-hmm.
They have to give it that whole like it seems like it's going to work out, and then no, it's not, and we have
Dun
to like
dun dun.
we have to they have to make us feel for the characters
Right.
a little bit more. Like we have to have a little more like, oh my gosh, show the turmoil, the whatever, so that it makes it juicier when they do get together. Which is
Yeah.
why my best friend's wedding is so interesting that they don't get together and we
Right.
actually watch her being a hot mess, unraveling, doing illegal, crazy things. When I watched that movie again this time, I was like, "This what?" She's like committing fraud. Like what?
Yes.
Who? Why would they just be like, "Oh, Jules, oh, you just hacked his email and is in his own office and
It's
broke in and
fine. It's
whatever."
fine. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot we did have email in 1997,
Oh
but
my
only like
gosh!
a certain group. But still, yeah, like that
And she's
nowadays.
smoking in the hallway where you're not
The
supposed to smoke, and
smoking.
like they're just showing just like how bad she is and how desperate she is.
Mm-hmm.
But we never really like, the pivot, she just gets more and more desperate. Like the timing of
Mm-hmm.
her thing is like, okay, time's running out, desperation, desperation. Like she'll go to
Yeah.
any length. And we're like, how did she get there when just a few days ago she wasn't even considering this?
Right.
This is weird.
That actually was a thing I was thinking about. I was like, God, this escalated so fast. Like
Yes.
it went from 0 to crazy bitch, like so quickly. Um, which is interesting because that's the difference between this one and all the other ones.
Yep.
Because I think 4 weddings and a funeral is like it's over the course of a year, I believe. And
Yeah.
then my wedding singer is at least a few months at
Hmm.
minimum. This
Hmm.
one's over the course of 4 days.
Right. A lot can happen in 4 days. And yeah,
Reminding
first of all, I'm
all
like,
of
how do
us.
all these activities get crammed into 4 days? Like what?
One of my pet peeves, though, I will tell you now that I've been in way too many weddings that some of those people are not married anymore. There was so many little things where it's like that would have been done 2 days before the wedding. You wouldn't be there. That wouldn't be a thing. When he's in like the half suit, when they're like measuring and doing all this stuff, and that's when she like introduces him to George. I was like, this would not be a thing happening.
Even that, like, how long they were together? What, like, how many months or something? 4 months? These
Something
people,
like
and
that.
they're
Yeah.
getting married, and they have all this like. When I mean, I guess when you have your wedding in your backyard, it's easier to plan, right? And you have this giant estate that you're living on. But I'm like, I planned weddings a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Had a little stint as a wedding planner, and I was like, the logistics of all that alone that they could do all this stuff last minute in like wedding season in Chicago. That's not believable.
Right? I was like, again, a delusional 13-year-old watching this movie going like, oh my God, this is adulthood. I can't wait.
I can't wait.
And now it's like, please take all of my bridesmaids dresses. I don't ever want to see that shit again. Please don't ever ask me to be in a wedding again. I don't want to do it. There's one person in my life who I'd be in a wedding for. That's it. At this point, at this juncture.
Yep.
Of course, all those other girls, if I ever do get married and somebody convinces me it's not a scam, then I expect all of those women where I dropped hundreds of dollars on dresses, plus gifts, plus travel to show up at my wedding. We need a 27 dresses moment.
We need, they need to be wearing all their dresses. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not quite 27 in my book, but still.
Yeah, but it's just all that conditioning. What I do love in my best friend's wedding, though, that they like Kimmy's allowing her to be an individual. She's like, you don't have to, of course, you wouldn't want it to wear the same dresses as everybody else. Like, I love that. Like, it makes her even like, crap, you're even nicer than,
Yeah. Besides
so again,
those other dresses,
just praise on the
ugly.
insecurity, right? It preys on, basically that's why Jules unravels so much. It's like, that's her weak spot that she didn't even know she had, was taking this person away that she sort of took for granted that she'd have forever. And someday they'd probably get married. You know what I mean? That was kind of, that's what that is, right?
I would love to see a version where they're in their mid to late 30s.
Yes.
Because I don't know if you've been a part of this rant, Bridget, but I need dating shows to stop taking 27 and under.
Seriously.
You don't get to say at 24 years old, you've been looking for love your whole life.
Oh my, but yeah.
No, you haven't.
I'm just watching another show that's similar. It's like, the age thing, right? So it's still that at this day and age, what we're getting shown is just, you got to be young. That's when you get married. It's for young people. But it's a certain kind of marriage too. It's like the institutional wedding, the whole first wedding, the whole expectation, all of that stuff.
Still very heteronormative too. Like, I'm sorry that you can come at me, gay community, for this comment, but wedding, like the whole structure and system of weddings is still very heteronormative, no matter how much you put your spin on it.
Yeah, it is.
That's probably why I hate it.
I mean, I've had people in my life refuse to get married until marriage equality happened, and then it did, and then it got taken away, and I got like it's brought, but like that, all of that. So that is weddings are for straight young people, like that, cis straight young people, like that's the movie trope. That's mostly what we're fed, right? And especially in the 90s. So if you were, again, like my age or so, that's what shaped you.
Yeah.
That's what shaped what you should want. And that's why my best friend's wedding was great, because it was like, don't be this guy. Like, she's this guy being her. She's doing great. She's successful. She's amazing. She's strong. She's funny. Everybody loves her, but she starts doubting herself and feeling insecure because she's not fucking married at 28 years old. And it's like, it still works out okay for her. She's got her gay best friend. That's relationship's probably going to last a lot longer than it would have with Michael anyway, because something would have happened. She wouldn't have wanted to have kids. She hates his career, whatever. The whole thing would have clashed, right?
Yeah.
But it's like a cautionary tale, but there's those moments of hope where she kind of accepts, like, I'm putting this idea to rest of something I thought was going to happen for me.
Yeah, it's almost like they really wanted it to be a cautionary tale, and then women like us were like, actually, that's kind of the dream.
Yeah.
So we would have loved to have the 28 successful solvent, like.
I know. And maybe the foreshadowing is that Julia Roberts then did Eat, Pray, Love, which is sort of like, maybe that's the future of Jules' character too. Like, she's doing her book sabbatical all over the world, and she's already, been through one marriage and I feel like that's a very on brand for the Jules character.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I totally agree. Oh my gosh. Bridget, thank you so much for coming by today to talk about 90s rom-coms and tropes and why I'm messed up in the head about love.
Like in the show notes, you have to put like a list of affirming wedding type movies to watch after you watch these to maybe make yourself feel better, or like,
Right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Can you please tell our friends at home where they can find you and support you?
Yes. Find me on Instagram at Bridget Baker Branding. That's where you can find me, and that has all my website detail and everything.
And friends, we'll link it in the show notes so that way there is no excuse for you to not take a look and see what Bridget's business is all about.